All right, hot mic.
Okay. We won't talk about you.
All right.
Later, I want to go past the house, not our house, the folks' house,
Mm-hmm.
to see if the show's taken care of.
Well, who's gonna take care of it?
The neighbor.
Yeah. We couldn't even get them to answer their door.
Hmm?
We couldn't even get them to answer their door that one time. Last time we were over, we were banging on their door to get cookies for everybody. They didn't even answer the door. And we knew they were inside.
I just realized we need to go up to the house before Gary moves, and we had to empty the closet out.
Actually, we need to
To what?
wait till afterwards because the microphone is on. We don't need to broadcast it.
I guess it depends on the individual, that guilt is useless as far as going towards the positive. I mean, it makes some people do it, some people not supposed to do.
Years ago, I
Yeah.
learned instead of feeling bad about something, make a goal of what I want to be. Because you know, you pray, God helps you. God, this is what I would like to be like. And it takes it off by practicing.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it's like to hear it.
That's that movie. Did you know they put out that movie? Dear one from Margaret. My daughter's 55 and it's popped in when she was in my middle school. And they made a movie. I don't know that. You know.
Oh, yes, yes.
Or
Are you leaving?
or I don't know.
Are you listening,
Listening.
Margaret? Or
Yeah, are you listening, God? It's me,
Margaret.
listening.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know anything about it. Good morning.
We probably will not go to a theater anymore. It's so nice to watch it and keep being.
There's some movies I want to see on big screen.
Well, you know, it makes it an event.
Yes.
But, you know, I've got 1,000 channels on my TV, on the streaming. And the thing is, I still don't find anything I want to watch. Gordy, I'll sit over
Hi.
here.
Get your song sheet there, baby.
Guess I gotta get my glasses out, then.
And there's that.
I should know this sits in the out.
You would think by now.
Remember?
Oh, thank you so
Well, I
much.
put it in my car, but it is on my bag.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes.
So our son took off for the week from his job.
Oh, we did?
And we're all three going to Disney World.
Cool.
It's gonna be hot, but he made reservations in restaurants
Good.
for the lunch and dinner so we can sit in air conditioning and eat slow.
Yeah,
It's kind of fun to think about getting to go.
How long are we gonna stay?
Well, leaving today, going Thursday, Friday, coming home Friday.
Oh, okay.
I thought one day was enough, but I'm not paying for it,
There you go.
so I won't complain.
Yeah.
And
I
my
think it's
dear.
not a cheap place anymore.
Now, where is it?
Disney World.
Oh.
My kids were little, we thought it was expensive because it was $10 a day.
Yeah.
Well, that's long gone.
Yeah.
Of course, when we were first married, we made $200 a month.
Yeah.
Grocery bill is $10 a month.
Yeah.
So we get no perspective anymore.
That's right. I remember back in the '60s, I worked at Evinrude. I worked and it was a union job, and I had a piecework job. I was making $60.
Ooh.
Hey, baby. Yeah. You know that one.
Whether it's the right same melody or and of course, as you know, I'm trying to learn to sing lower because I can't get those high notes in.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, Pastor Rock.
So, just a closer walk with you, the sheet that you have there, the way that it is printed to save space, the refrain is kind of in italics on the bottom.
Okay.
So,
Right where it
it's
says refrain.
verse 1 and then below verse 3 is where we see the refrain. So you kind of, your eyes kind of have to jump up and down a little bit. All right. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close safely o'er to thy kingdom shore, to thy shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, Lord, let it be. Let's pray. Thank you for walking close to us, Lord. Thank you for being with us here today. And thank you for the journey that you have created for us, for all that is behind and all that is before us. We're so glad that you're with us each and every step of the way. We love you and thank you in your name. Amen. All right, a little disclaimer today. I messed up my back on Monday. I've got a disc that's been a problem since since mid-20s. So normally everything's fine, but if just the right set of circumstances. So anyway, I've kind of been in recline for the last 2 days. If I move funny or anything, I'm not on any major medications or anything this morning. Nothing major, but anyway, just wanted to put that out there in case I started looking like something was wrong with me. And I'm kind of leaning on the table a little bit extra today.
Don't strain yourself or hurt yourself.
Thank you.
You already did.
Thank you. Yeah, I wish you would have told me that on Monday morning just before it happened.
I'll try to be good.
And if you need to walk around or anything, by all means, go for it.
All right.
Or close up early.
Or close up early.
All right, so we're in 5. Maybe one day we'll get out of 5, chapter 5.
At least we're in it.
Yeah, at least we're in it. So, welcome, Joy. I can see, Joy, you're here with us this morning. And we welcome anybody else that's going to join us after we've started here. So, just before the section entitled A Direct Encounter with God's Love, I want to look at these last couple sentences here. And it says, in step 5 of the 12 steps, a very similar technology for healing and restoration is set forth. A clear structure of accountability for knowing, speaking, and hearing the full truth so it does not kill the addict or others. Perhaps that is the best kind of retribution and the only one that really helps both parties at a spiritual level. So, let's look back here. We should have read this first. It's not highlighted, but the sentence before that quotes the Gospel of Thomas, which you will not find in your regular Bible. It's a discovery from the 1940s, and it likely was written a couple hundred years after Jesus. This is one of the Gnostic Gospels, and most of those were destroyed when Gnosticism was considered to be a heresy for the church. But within those Gospels, there were some that survived that they found in the mid-1940s. It's interesting to see their take on things. And Gnosticism wasn't like one set of beliefs. It was kind of a broad variety of beliefs. Gnosticism is based on the word gnosis, which is knowledge. So it's this idea that the gospel gives you this divine knowledge that you could not otherwise have access to through rational thought or just regular education or the regular life experience. And so this is a quote from Thomas, "If you bring forth that which is within you, it will save you. If you do not bring it forth, it will destroy you." So that's the quote here that what we first read is kind of based on. So it's this idea, pardon me?
Did I already?
Yeah, jump in.
That's very interesting because my minister, when I first moved to Florida in 1969, had a soft voice like yours. And in my book study, just with you, I'll hear things and say things in that peacefulness that I had not thought about or thought about raggedly, but it comes together.
Mm-hmm.
It's in me, but I can't, until someone's given me a very peaceful situation, I don't hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. There are, we talked a lot about the process of emotions last week, and this is something that I'm realizing. So if emotions are, this is along the same lines of what you're talking about, Sandra. If emotions are a combination of a physical experience and a mental experience, it's a physical feeling of some sort attached to some thought or series of thoughts or collection of thoughts. And when those come together, we call it anger, love, fear. And you know, emotions, you could probably find a list online of emotions that, you know, maybe there's 100 different kind of particular emotions. So it's interesting that there are certain thoughts that will come out under physical circumstances, under certain physical circumstances or experiences that don't come out otherwise. I'll give you an example. This may not be the best example, but let's say like somebody is inebriated, somebody is they're high, they've had a few drinks, or they've had something that we'd say helps people to be not inhibited. So what happens is it's actually the physical feeling of euphoria or of at ease or warmth or whatever that positive physical feeling is. That's what gives somebody, it almost like sets somebody free to say what they're thinking in the moment. Now, usually we don't encourage that, because sometimes something good comes out and sometimes something comes out that later on you wish you hadn't said it. But if you just take the drinking out of it and just put yourself in just going through your regular day without any extra help, if you have a happy feeling, it's almost like you have access to these thoughts, or you will release and say these thoughts that maybe under different circumstances, if you weren't feeling so great, you wouldn't say. And on the other hand, if you're really angry and you're feeling like the adrenaline and whatever else physically goes with that, you have access to, and you might speak thoughts that you wouldn't have under other circumstances. So isn't it funny that the truth is in there either way? It's deep in there, but under emotional circumstances, we feel like those thoughts are a little bit more clear. And maybe what you're talking about, when you have a sense of peace and calm and there's not distraction, then those things can come forward. That's why like journal writing is encouraged, because usually it's something like beginning of the day, before the day has had its chance to throw stuff at you. In having rested that evening, when you're calm, what are you thinking in those moments? So you have access to this stuff, and you can express these things that maybe in the middle of the day you wouldn't say or wouldn't think because of your day is already going in a certain direction.
Well, I have an example. I told you before that my mother had a damaged brain because of a shot she had. It's common, they quit giving that shot because of it. But she had a lot of hallucinations. I was still a toddler before I went to kindergarten, but we'd go to my grandparents. And I remember when my children were little, I was very fearful I would lose them. And one day in this piece of this study group, Pastor was talking, I saw my sister and I standing at our screen door. My parents were outside and we were saying, we don't want to go home with you. And that when I said, I got to call my mother, because she didn't raise me after that. And I called her and told her I loved her. I knew this wasn't her fault. Even as a little kid, I didn't see this her fault. But in the peace of the moment, I knew she needed love in order for me to get the love that makes me think people let me keep my kids.
Right. Wow. Yeah, we have a wealth of experience and insight and truth that we hold inside of us, and it seems like in a lot of ways we protect ourselves, or we filter those things to function through normal life. But it's almost like if we don't acknowledge what we know to be true, and this is kind of what this chapter is about, is where you're confessing or you're saying things that you know to be true. If you hold those things within and you don't let them out, it almost seems like your life experience is going to be incomplete in some way. And sometimes those are positive insights, and sometimes those are truths that we don't want to admit, you know?
The more I peel things away, the more free I become to say the things I need to say.
Right.
Because I can say them without hostility. I just say what I need to say.
Right. And probably along the way, you've gotten bits of courage or just the right circumstances to say the truth, and that once you've said it, it's like, oh, that was good to say. I feel relieved, you know. I've had experiences. I remember an experience in a prayer group, and when I needed to forgive somebody, and when I said it, I remember the physical feeling, almost like that something was just coming off my shoulders. I felt lighter, physically lighter. So just think about all the things that we carry, and oftentimes, you know, we talk about how it's important for whoever you share it with, for it to be somebody that you trust and that you're safe with and that has wisdom. Probably some of the reasons why we don't say what we know to be true is because it's not safe. Yeah, and somebody wouldn't understand, or it would backfire. It would come back to hurt us. But I can tell you, you know, I've shared with you that I meet once a month with a mentor/therapist, and just having somebody that I know that I can say whatever I need to say, it's wonderful. And the thing is, like, we can be surrounded by people that we love dearly, but oftentimes we love people so dearly that we want to protect them from us, from what we really think or what our experience has been, or, you know, and especially when our lives become enmeshed and entangled, you know, sometimes it's the people. We need to say something true about somebody that we love, or about ourselves, and you know, we want to maintain that relationship. And there are some things that, though they're true, they're not beneficial to say and to acknowledge within a relationship. Some things are good. Some challenging things are good, so that you can build on them and understand each other better. But then there are other things. I remember in premarital counseling, we talk about this a lot. How much do you share about your previous relationships when you're getting ready to marry somebody? And so there may be some things that could be beneficial, and there could be some things that are just they're not beneficial. They don't help. They're not helpful to the one that you love, and it might even be detrimental to share something. We should share something that's going to impact their life. You know, if I'm gonna marry somebody and I don't tell them that I have 10 kids, you know, I might be able to keep that quiet for a while. But in this day and age with social media and how easy it is to share information, you know, that's something worth saying. But maybe there's some conversations with somebody, you know, somebody you've previously been in a relationship with. It's not really beneficial to share those things. So same with our kids. There's more of a tendency now for parents to share more with their kids, I think, than parents did before, about who they are as people, and to kind of move more toward a friendship. But there definitely comes a point where sharing who you are as a person can take away from your role as a parent. So it's who we share with is important, and in a way, it's nice to have somebody that this is, you know, the Catholic Church has the confessor. Now I'm not Catholic, so I know the idea of that and the reality of that could be very different things. If it is your priest, if it's your pastor, you know, I don't think I want to know everybody's stuff here at the church. You know, I don't need access to that information. But there is something about having a confessor, having somebody that you can talk to and share something with, to be unburdened or to look for.
Well, this is all more acceptable today. I read, I don't know, it seems true, that when we were agricultural society, everybody worked alone. We didn't have to be relating, but when we became an industrial society, we were starting to learn to try to get along with the guy in the same line.
Yeah.
And that's when we started to try to improve our relationships.
Right. That was one of the parts that that COVID really brought out, is the number of domestic abuse cases went up significantly during COVID because everybody was living in the same room and they weren't going out to work, or they were working from home. So they were forced to be together all the time, just like people are in jail. You're living in close quarters all the time and not having a break from each other. You live on the farm, when do you see each other? You know, like at the end of the day when you're eating supper, maybe a little bit at the beginning, but basically you have the whole day where you're off doing your thing and doing the work. So yes, there may be more of a need to use those skills of relating to each other. So this idea of bringing forth what is within you, it will save you. And if you don't bring it forth, it will destroy you. So, you know, I think we can all kind of get a sense of how that can be true. So this system of accountability in step 5 is where you have someone that helps you to bring forth that which is within you. Because it's one thing to think the truth, it's another thing maybe to write down the truth. It's another thing to let somebody else know it. There's just something about the way that we're wired as human beings where it becomes more true when you tell somebody than if you're just keeping it to yourself. All right, direct encounter with God's love. We humans beings admit to one another the exact nature of their wrongs. We invariably have a human and humanizing encounter that deeply enriches both sides and even changes lives, often forever. It's no longer an exercise to achieve moral purity or regain God's love, but in fact a direct encounter with God's love. It is not about punishing one side, but liberating both sides. So this is, I think it's been great that we've had Elaine share in several cases, like, why do I need to say these things? There may be some things that I don't want to say. And I think it's probably wise to think twice before sharing, not to just share everything. One would be, just knowing that you trust the other person. But in the case where we do have someone that we trust, and we do admit to someone what we have done that we recognize as being wrong, the way that we heal from that is through love. And that is the way a lot of things in our life are healed, if not everything ultimately. Because what we get when we admit is that we give the opportunity then to be loved by somebody else. Now, yeah, we could go through all of this just between me and God. And maybe there is some set of circumstances that's better to stay between you and God. I don't know. But there is we just seem to be wired and created as human beings to need and to thrive with love. And having the chance for someone to love you, to say, I hear you, I think I understand what you're saying. I'm now feeling just a little bit of what you've been feeling as you've shared it with me. And, I imagine that must be very hard, what you've experienced, or very painful or scary. And everything is going to be okay. And I love you and thank you for sharing that. Those encounters can just be life-changing, truly.
But I haven't always been greeted with acceptance, because in 1970, when our preacher was doing these things, the presbytery was not happy with him that he was studying books that would help us in our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So there was still, the men especially didn't want to hear, well, I get a valuing. But that's part of my growth, though, is that I've learned to deal with the fact that everybody doesn't like everything I say, and that's freeing too.
There's the attitude toward feelings and sharing experiences. It has changed just in the generations that we are aware of, and you can understand why somebody doesn't want to share, because it's terrifying to share. It's you're giving an opportunity for someone else to have something on you.
You're handing over power.
You're handing over.
That's right.
You're handing over your power, and so, yeah, you can understand why some people would say no. I will not be sharing these things, because I don't see the benefit in being vulnerable, and I'm losing control if I do that. And somebody might not acknowledge it, but until you say it, you don't have to really face it. Like you face something when you admit the truth of it to another person. You face it in a way that's probably the closest you can get to what you experienced initially.
And for people who try to deny their feelings, I might be in their discomfort, but it might not hurt them to have to hear this unhappy thought once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how there's courage in the physical world and there's courage in the emotional world. And who is courageous in each of those worlds is kind of different, There may be somebody that is not afraid of anything in the physical world, not afraid of physical pain. But if you ask them to come face to face with something emotional in their experience, they're afraid and they don't have the courage for that. And a lot of that probably has to do with control, having a sense of control. It's like because it is scary. If I acknowledge what I'm feeling, I've heard this and experienced this myself in the process of grief. Sometimes you feel if I let myself cry, I don't think I'm going to be able to stop. There's a grief that carries that weight where you feel like if I allow myself to let this floodgate open, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what it's going to feel like. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know if I will just be out of control. Some people think like, I'm just going to have a break. I'm going to have a mental break if I let myself cry. So it just goes to show like the power of those feelings that we carry with us. And so it takes trust for someone to say, you can let it go, it'll be okay. I mean, you have to trust. Maybe somebody who's been there and gone through it, that makes it a little bit easier to trust. But and to know that it's actually in the grief process, when you allow yourself to fully experience the pain of something and just to let out the way that you feel about it, there actually is something healing about that is freeing. But in order to be open to kind of replay feelings that you've had in the grief process is scary. And there's other things that are not just related to grief. There are painful experiences that maybe the primary feeling we have is rage. If I admit what I experienced, and if I tell somebody, I'm gonna wake up this rage in me and I don't know if I can turn it off. I don't know what it's gonna do. I don't know, I can't be held responsible for what I'm gonna do if I let this thing out. There are experiences like that too. So we experience things that they're too much for one person to go through alone, but it takes a lot of courage to face those experiences. And it is love that ultimately gives us the courage to go through them, and it is love that heals the brokenness that's come from those things. All right. All right. I'm going to have to read. I'm going to have to remember why this got underlined, but we can read this together. This is a paragraph beginning with Ezekiel. Ezekiel laid the biblical groundwork for truth speaking, should be total accountability, and restorative justice. For him, the cement that holds the whole thing together is Yahweh being true to Yahweh's self and not merely reacting to human failure, or God would not be free, said Franciscan scholar John Duns Scotus. For Ezekiel, God always acts with total freedom from divine integrity and unilateral faithfulness to the covenant with Israel, whether they keep their side or not. This becomes the foundational theme of radical grace, without which grace would not be grace at all. So,
I have a big question mark next to that paragraph.
about the whole paragraph?
Yeah, I'm lost in it.
So, one of the challenges to admitting our wrongs or to admitting our shortcomings is, what is God going to think? Or what is God going to do? And there's a lot of fear in that. Now, for some it may be the fear of some type of punishment. It might be fear of God's anger. It might be fear of rejection from God. Even if there's somebody that we really love and we have to admit something to them that's going to hurt them, we may know that they love us, but there can be a fear that it's going to change the relationship in some way. Maybe that person is not going to see me the same. Maybe they're not going to love me the same. Maybe they're not going to trust me the same. So for me to really be myself with this person that I love and to admit some things that have been wrong, I think maybe a lot of people approach God in that way, where it's like, I don't know, what do you think? I know in some ways I've had the experience where I feel like God is the only one that I can trust and say, like, God, I mean, you know me better than me. And you knew this was coming, and you know what I'm thinking, and you know my heart. But I don't know how much of that idea of who God is was given as a gift to me. Where did I learn that from? I can't claim that I came up with that myself. But not everybody thinks about God that way.
Well, if you admit something to God that is really, earth-shattering, one of the things that's going to come in your head is, which God am I talking to? The Old Testament God or the New Testament
Fear
God?
and love. I think so.
Which one am I talking to, and what reaction will I get?
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think a lot of times we don't want to admit something to God because it's like, well, maybe God doesn't really know all of this about me.
How'd you keep that secret?
And if I
Have
don't
I
tell
managed
him-
to hide this?
If I don't tell him, I'm hiding it from him. I mean, when you got stuff going on in your head, who knows where it's coming from?
I met a guy at the grocery store. This made me painted. I knew, it was in our vacation home, so not real well, but I saw him a lot at the hangar. And I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Well, my wife divorced me, and she's telling all these awful things that I didn't do them. Well, I figured he did some awful things so she wouldn't have divorced him. How was I going to talk to him?" And so he told me this stuff, and I said, "Well, I think that all of us sin and fall short." I took that direction. All of us sin and fall short of the glory of God. That's in the scriptures. But I also think it's balanced by that we all can choose to be saints. But we swing back and forth between the two, and he hugged me and said, "Oh, I needed that." He wasn't just
Right.
awful husband.
Yeah,
He can choose, and sometimes does.
right.
Way.
So that's interesting that we have this capacity. We have this capacity for the best of us and the worst of us. And we live somewhere in there. It probably moves a little bit from day to day. I do want to speak about the idea of God, Old Testament, New Testament. There is a few things about that. One is what we know about God for the most part is based on our human capacities and our human perceptions. So in some ways, we can look at the Old and New Testament, or we can look at kind of the process of time as this is not who God was here, here, and here. This is who we thought God was as humans. Humans thought God was this way in Genesis or Ezekiel or Matthew or Revelation. So part of that is keeping that in mind, that we are still held, even with faith, we're held within the limits of human perception. And God is always infinitely beyond even what we fully know about God. That's one thing.
And we're looking at the writings of people who wrote things about what they thought God was 2,000 years
That's
ago.
right.
Right.
And
Right.
if you look at it that way, think of us trying to write about what people are going to think about 2,000 years from now.
Right.
They're gonna-
Exactly.
You look at the year 4000, you're like, oh my gosh, forget it. But then you look back towards Jesus' day, and it's 2,000 years ago, and it's like, well, yeah, it was a long time ago, but I mean,
So one of the books that has been just paradigm shifting for me, Stephanie Kuhn's The History of Marriage. And the big takeaway from her book, where she outlines what she has studied as an historian of what marriage has been like throughout human history, not just for our culture, but in all cultures. Love has not been the basis and the foundation of a marriage relationship until about 150 years ago. It was never that before. There may have been love within a relationship, but love was not the basis of it. And when we look at it in today's terms, we're essentially looking at two equal individuals who make the decision to share their life with one another, and it's based on love and relationship between the person. Before that, it was based on social networking and economics. It was your connection to your community, and it was your commitment, and it was not equal individuals linked together, because we're not far away from the realization that women are not property.
Yeah.
That's a relatively new way of thinking in
Yep.
human history. So it's not until you have two individual people who love one another and want to spend their life together that decide to get married for that reason. That concept is not in the history books, and it's not in the Bible, and it's nowhere past 150 years ago. Because 150 years ago, it was a man takes this property person, ties together family relationships within the community, there are economic benefits, and that's the arrangement that we have. And people, say, well, marriage used to last a long time. Well, it's like, yeah, but they were doing something different than what we're doing right now.
It was property.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a different arrangement.
Yeah.
And though the name is marriage and this name is marriage, they're two completely different experiences. So if you take that, if that's the way we've thought about marriage and it's changed just within the 150 years.
It's even less than that.
Imagine
because
our-
women didn't even get the right to vote.
No, that's just
until
100
barely
years
100
old.
years ago.
Yeah, yep,
And they were still considered second-class citizens even after that.
right, right. So if that's where we are on our personal relationships and on the concept of marriage, how much more should our understanding of God, how much has it changed? Or has it not changed? And if it hasn't changed, maybe there's a problem.
Maybe it should have.
So yes, when we say like, I'm confessing this to God, or I'm letting God know this, yeah, a big part of that is, who is God to you? And this is essentially saying there are indications throughout history that it was always God maintaining faith in the relationship. And usually when that relationship with God broke down, as far as the covenant between God's people and God, it was God's people that did not have faith in that relationship. Either they got so successful that they're just like, well, we don't need God anymore since we got all this, or
They feel like God abandoned them.
yeah, they said like, you know, poor us, God, we're going through this, and we don't know if we can trust you because like you promised something, and look at where we are now. Yeah, there's a way that we look at life and our circumstances, and it's like maybe we don't talk to God that much, but if something goes really, really wrong in our life, we know who we're going to blame. We got to blame somebody. We're going to put God's face on it and be like, it's God that let this happen or made this happen or whatever. So in a way, I don't know how, it kind of shows how our relationship with God is really not that great.
When Tim died, I was concerned about my family, who I think of God more as a loving person and things are going well.
Mm-hmm.
But what really amazes me is they have not blamed God. They have become more faithful, knowing that He's going to be with them. I'm really quite happy with it, but so surprised since they haven't had to deal with that close of death.
Right. That's a big one, because that's a really common thing for people to blame God for. And we struggle with that in our faith to make sense of death at all. Even if it's not premature, but just why do we have to deal, why does death even exist for us? If God is so good, why does death exist? And we can come up with simple answers, the wages of sin are death. But it's hard for me to buy into an idea that because of some decisions that we made as human beings, that's how evil entered into the universe, and that's how death and destruction entered the universe. When you look at things like, we're able to see now with the telescopes that we have, we can actually watch galaxies colliding with one another. Now, you just say watching, we're just watching some lights come together, right? This means, just imagine our planets and our sun all colliding together. And that means the ultimate death of Earth, of the existence of human beings and all of its history vaporized and gone forever. There are things like that happening within the universe. Adam and Eve eating an apple didn't make those galaxies collide with one another, I don't think.
It does seem like our family has been deepened in our relationships because of the sorrow we share.
Right.
It doesn't, we don't feel condemned, we just feel like that's the way it is, but we really realize we can't just slide over life.
Right. Yeah, we do need to understand morality and the the importance of being responsible in the choices that we make, how we impact ourselves and other people. But to take that and to say that that is going to have a greater impact than in reality it will is not really fair. It's really just, I think we have to come to terms that we don't, the origins of bad things or just bad things happening are going to be a mystery to us, because, I mean, volcanoes have been erupting and hurricanes have been happening and tsunamis and earthquakes and there's been outbreaks of diseases. There's been death and destruction all along. And the crazy part is we need death in order to live. Because, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit. Every single living thing that we eat, whether it's a plant or an animal, it will die inside of us if it hasn't died already, and its nutrients and life force will come into our bodies, and that's what keeps us alive. We have to kill plants and animals and consume them in order to live. So that's just the nature of nature. It's even the dead leaves that fall to the ground give nutrients to the earth that help to produce life. So there's this, the circle of life kind of an idea, but we're afraid of that. Ultimately, I think because we're afraid of the annihilation of ourselves as individuals. We're afraid to think of that being gone.
Yeah.
And we're the only ones that really can see it. That there's, if everything else ends, then there's going to be an end to me too. How do I deal with that? Yeah. I'm going to get mad at God. That's how I'm going to deal with it. It's funny because that's a human response, and that blame is actually, when we blame, it is our way to not deal with what we're really feeling. Because it's easy when we get angry. If we can put a face on it, then we can kind of direct our anger instead of focusing on the pain or the fear that's going on inside of us. And so we can end up neglecting why we're so upset. We're so upset because we're afraid and we're in pain. We're not upset because of that person or that guy. But we can turn, and we do this all the time, we'll turn our pain and fear into anger, and we'll take it out on somebody else. Another person, or we'll take it out on God.
Even a toddler like Lila's only 3 years old, and she was there as a whole family was with Tim as he died in the living room. But she doesn't understand, probably doesn't even know about dying. But when they go by the hospital, she said, "Oh, let's go see Pops." And her parents will say, "Oh no, he's not there. He's with Jesus." And she'll say, "He misses us. Why don't you stop?" She's angry at her mom and dad because they won't go to the hospital.
Right.
He's missing them.
Yep.
And I think her anger is what we know words for, but she doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I think that probably encapsulates a lot of what we go through. We're angry, but we have. But what's below or beneath the anger is pain. Almost always, we just use the anger to get something to change, or it's another way to express the pain that doesn't make us feel the pain,
or to deny the pain.
It's a way to deny the pain. So I think when we see anger, it usually lets us know we're a little far removed from acceptance, and we're going to have to bring it back. We're probably going to have to move from anger back to the pain and experience the pain before we get to the place of acceptance. Because we do all kinds of things to avoid the painful experiences, like denial and depression and anger and whatever the other one is, bargaining. Yeah. So it's God in our history of understanding God. In our story, we don't have an example of God leaving us, or God forsaking us, or God breaking covenant with us. But it is usually us not appreciating or breaking covenant with God. This is somewhat of what we're talking about here. God always acts with total freedom from divine integrity and unilateral faithfulness to the covenant with Israel, whether they kept their side or not. So that means grace would not, it's a foundational thing of radical grace, which without grace would not be grace at all. So it is just by God's grace that God stays in covenant with us. The fact that God is always available to us, that's what we see in scriptures.
Comment.
Yes.
Okay, so, I was told that like if I'm stumbling like on a step to go back a few steps. So, not that I'm stumbling on this, but, what comes to my mind is, back in step 3, if I've truly made that decision and I'm acting out on it to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand God, the Old Testament and the New Testament, as I understand how God works, one day at a time, that when I do get to step 5, we talked about handing over our power to someone else. The way that the step is written, admitted to God, so handing over what I think is my power over to God, my pain, my past, which God already knows it. However, and then to myself, I'm admitting it, and then it goes back to that another human being, it goes back to that I'm truly trusting this human being, I was told that pain shared is pain lessened. And that when I admit something and I speak it out loud and I tell another person or persons, then I don't own it anymore. It's kind of like an admission or a confession or whatever. Excuse me. And one of the things we were talking about with death, my parents died very tragically years ago. And so I had the family, had to go through their things, had so much going on. My kids were, like early teenagers, and it was a pretty tough time. So I took care of everything I had to take care of that day. We had relatives from out of town, all that stuff. At the end of the day, every day when I laid in bed, for a little while there, I cried. And I knew that I was going to have that time all to myself, where my husband heard me, and he was very comforting. However, I knew that I was going to have that time where I could just let it all out, and my tears were a cleansing. I still get a little angry here and there, yes, but I understood that and this is the difficult part sometimes, I think, that when we deal with death and with painful situations, is that I knew that I would take my pain and my experience, my past, and I'd be able to share it with someone else. And God would be using me, that I should feel honored in a way that God was using me to share this pain with someone else. And, excuse me, not a lot of people have that opportunity, or see it as that, so, that was one way for me to deal, to come to that point of acceptance,
That's
why
good.
did this happen?
Right. There is some comfort knowing that our acceptance and our healing can be helpful in other people's healing. There's a lot of comfort in that. I personally I've struggled to go all the way to say that something bad happened for the reason of so that this good thing can happen in the future. Because there are some things that happen to just innocent people or people that had nothing to do with the loss of their life, and to say that the reason that happened was that something good could happen in the future. There may be some connections to those, but I personally can't fully buy into the reason why that happened. If for some reason that makes me angry, because it feels like, I think anger can also come from just the frustration that there's some logical disconnects between these things. Like,
Let me rephrase that a little. I don't believe that their deaths happened so that some.
but there's still a silver lining.
However, I
Right.
thought that if there was anything
Yeah.
that came out of this.
Right.
It was the acceptance that, yes, God is in charge, not
Right,
me. And
right.
that some people's will of what happened is, I'm powerless over
Right,
other people.
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is that if there's anything that I could find positive would be, yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
I know that they didn't.
I agree with you, because I mean, my first experience, like with the loss of my mother, when I look at the opportunities and new relationships that never would have happened without her passing, there is something within that maybe makes it a little bit easier for me to accept that it happened. But I struggled with the logic of she died so that this could happen, because inevitably, if that's used as like a truth, there's going to be some set of circumstances that's not going to work for. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and people will use this for the Holocaust. I mean, where it's like, well, the Holocaust happened so that yada 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 could happen, and it's like, I don't know what kind of messed up God would like choose to like let history unfold like that and need for something so horrible to happen just for something, whatever. How good would something have to be in order for that to be necessary? So that's the part where, but again, I'm on board with you that when I do see I see God's grace through it. I see God's grace in, like for example, after my mom passed and my dad joined this new church, he met his wife there. And then I met my wife there, my brother met his wife here, and my other brother met her wife there, and we all have families together, so we never would have met any of those people or been a part of that had it not been for this experience where my mother passed. My dad went to a grief group. He met a woman in the grief group. They became friends. They eventually got married, yada, yada, yada. So I can see God's grace in that. Yeah, I
Your
can.
mother wasn't sacrificed for this, but
Right.
you all have been able to deal with your grief.
Right.
And find new life.
Right. So it's interesting you use that word, because I think along the same lines, when we look at the death of Christ, the early followers were trying to make sense of why would he be killed? Why would God allow him to be killed? And there came along some simple explanations of, he had to die so that everybody could go to heaven, so everybody could be free from sin. He had to. So God made it so that this sacrifice would produce this good thing. And it's like, that still, there's something in there about like a father sacrificing a child or a parent sacrificing a child for some other benefit. It's just twisted. It's really messed up, especially as we understand relationships today. For a parent to sacrifice a child, even if something wonderful came out of it, you would look at that parent and say, you are messed up for doing
Well,
that.
in today's society,
This is not
2,000
okay.
years ago,
This is not okay. This is not okay for you to allow your child to go through this for some benefit. It's like, you don't love that child. You know? And to think that like God had his hands tied and that was the only way that it could work. It's like, doesn't God make up the rules? Isn't God the one that's like, that's making the rules of sin needs this to whatever? No, what all this is like us trying to make sense of what happened. So some people have said it was a sacrifice for the greater good. It's one way to understand it, and maybe there's some benefit to that. But I think we need to step back and be like, maybe it's something different. You know, one of the ways to view it is if we're Trinitarian and believe that Christ is God, then it's made more sense for me for it to be an issue of self-sacrifice. And that makes more sense that God would sacrifice God's self
yeah.
for the benefit of humanity. There's some that fits my concept of morality better than God sacrificing something else. That's
And another way you can look at it is if Jesus had not died on the cross, then he would not have risen 3 days later and gone into heaven, and Christianity would never have gone anywhere.
mm-hmm.
It would have been,
Right.
well, we put this guy to death, okay, move on, let's get, you know.
And then there's some other parts of it too that are just like I think there are some things that are okay to leave to we don't really understand. It is possible, believe it or not, to say Jesus didn't have to die. Now that sounds like kind of heretical. There's probably some Bible that might be the opposite
Yeah.
of that. But if you think about it, maybe Jesus it wasn't that he had to die. It's simply that he just got killed. So if somebody's murdered, why would we say, oh, they had to die? You know, if there's a good person doing it, Martin Luther King Jr., he had to die.
No,
No, he didn't.
baloney, yeah.
He was murdered. He was doing a good thing that was helping a lot of people and moving our country in a direction where we had to come face to face with some realities. And some people didn't like it, and somebody killed the guy. Now, there may have come some blessings, some silver linings, some grace we may have seen after that, but to say that he had to die just doesn't make sense. So I think maybe we should look at the cross that way. Jesus didn't have to die. Jesus was killed. He was murdered.
Who knows what kind of good Jesus could have done? I mean, we only know of a couple of years of his ministry.
Yeah.
And who knows what he could have done in the next 10 years? Oh
Right.
my gosh.
Yes.
Right.
While we're talking about sacrifice, this is a little more like Bible study. I could never understand Abraham. We're supposed to trust God like Abraham trusted God to kill our child,
Yeah.
which I not swallowed. But I love history. I watched C-SPAN and only took one history class in college, but when I took the Florida State accreditation class, I'm accredited to teach history just because I've loved it so much. I'm always reading books about it. And I see throughout the millennium, people sacrifice children and virgins and everybody, thinking that'll make God happy. So maybe that wasn't to make God happy, but for us to say, Abraham, you don't have to sacrifice your child. That's not part of God's way. And that may have been a turning point away from sacrifice, because Jesus really followed through on, you don't even have to sacrifice the animal for me, for God.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
to me, it's a long history of
Right.
process.
By today's standards, by our understanding of morality today, if God speaks to me and says, sacrifice my child, I'll be like, well, it's been nice knowing you, God, but I'm out of this relationship.
Yeah.
This is a deal breaker.
Yeah.
So, you know, I do think there's a way to look at the story and say, we were just talking about it this morning in the office, the covenant and the promise was something that God gave to Abraham out of love and grace. It's not something that Abraham earned or deserved. And it's not something he even expected, because he was already 100 years old. I'm sure he had accepted the fact that he wasn't going to have kids,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's a grace that was given to Abram. So then Abram is asked, if God has given you this grace, will you give it back to God? Do you still view it as God's gift to you? God gave you, God the Indian giver. You're probably not supposed to say that anymore. But it's like God gives, and then God says, can I have that back? And our response should be, God, it was yours all along. I was being a good steward. I was watching this for you.
Yeah.
Now, we'll probably be upset at the beginning. It's like, hey, why? I thought you gave this to me. I'm kind of attached to this right now. But there is something about not holding on to and not grasping too much of this that is around us. What's most important is our relationship with God. But I can't see that story unfolding on today's terms and make any kind of sense, because for us, that innocent life that comes from us is the most precious thing, more than life itself, more than anything. That's where you say, I don't know, why didn't Abraham say, can you sacrifice me instead?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, he bargained with God in these other places, about
When it came to that,
Sodom.
he's like,
What if there's
okay.
50 righteous in the city? Will you spare it? Okay, there's not. Oh, what about 20? What about 10? What about 1? So he bargained, but he didn't bargain in
And just
this.
aside to what we were talking about with Jesus, my son is watching The Chosen. And as I've watched that, what's surprising to me over all the old Cecil B. DeMille stories, Jesus was a preacher, and you hear all his sermons, but The Chosen talks about his inept followers and them wanting to do right and not doing it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so my son asked me, well, how do we know that Jesus is the Messiah? But it's 2,000 years ago. How did we know he was, but all these other preachers are not the Messiah? And I said, well, I guess it must have been, I don't know, but I said, watching The Chosen, I think it must be his followers that make the difference. Because Jones had his followers drink Kool-Aid and die. So it's what Jesus could pass along to people that could make a difference as to how people feel about him, not his dying or anything else.
Right.
You talked about the
Yeah, it's kind of
sacrifices.
what Jesus woke up within them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like Jesus says to his disciples when they ask, like, how will we know if a prophet is legitimate or not? And he says, by their fruit you will know them. So ultimately the fruit that has come out of that ministry is for sure an indication that there's something real going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, what were you?
You're talking about how the change in attitudes on sacrifices. It's like it used to be on the islands. If a volcano erupted, how are we going to calm that volcano down?
Sure.
Get the virgins.
Yeah. Yeah. This is similar to like what they did with Jonah.
Yeah.
If there's a big storm, you got to make a sacrifice to the storm god, and then the storm will quit. And they were right. they were right.
Yeah.
You're always right once in a while.
Yeah.
Clock's right twice a day.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're gonna wrap up here. We're inching our way through. I think what happens is there's something about this fifth step that is just, there's a lot of meat here that we're chewing on, I guess. And, yeah, it is interesting what we're doing. I think maybe one of the ways that we look at this, we admit to God ourselves and someone else, right? That's the fifth step. And one of the things probably we should consider is we often separate these things, but by faith, when we understand how connected we are with God within us and God around us, then when we share with someone else, just look at the parable Jesus tells where the people feed the hungry and clothe the naked, and then when they come to the judgment and God says, you fed me and clothed me, and they're like, really? He's like, yeah, whatever you did to the least of these you did to me, because I'm in them, I'm in you. And so that means, in a way, when you're sharing with God is when you are sharing with somebody else. And when you're experiencing the love of that other person and the input and the presence of that other person, that is the presence of God. And that's probably something important to know as well, or important to consider as well. We'll keep it up.
Yeah.
Send us out in the power of your Spirit, Lord. May our lives